breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, and my co-host, as always, Dr. Glenn Harrison. What's up, buddy?
Doing great. How are you on this fine evening?
Good, man. It's been a little busy at the house, been busy at work, which are all good things, good problems to have, I suppose.
Yeah.
How about yourself? I know that you're
about
getting over the crud and back in the swing of things now.
Yeah, recovering from a fun cold and all that stuff, and then life goes on, so you really can't keep your foot off the gas too long, right?
So, no, I mean, you just fall further behind when you do, right? So,
and you gotta keep your focus on everything as well.
It takes a lot of mental stamina.
Yeah.
So today we are going to talk about something that is really, really prevalent and is becoming more prevalent even as we discover more about it. And we are talking about cognitive decline. And when we talk about cognitive decline, we're talking there's several subsets or subclassifications of cognitive decline. And we'll get a little bit into that later. But if this is your first time listening or watching, you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast or whatever you are, make sure you hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications so that when new content rolls out, you get access to that as soon as it comes out. So let's get started. Let's talk about cognitive decline and what are some things that we can do within the framework of our own lives that can help mitigate some of the risks or maybe limit some of our potential risk factors for developing cognitive decline.
Yeah, well, this is a big deal. I think we've touched on a little bit of this in a previous podcast. I know I have on the channel that I was running for a while, and it's never a concern until people start feeling a little bit of a mental slip, and usually in their 50s, 60s, they start, I have patients that start asking questions. They start to get concerned. Or if we have, a loved one and then we're worried about them, but it's kind of like, it can't happen to me, 30, 40, 50, it can't happen to me, but that's when it's happening. And here's some pretty frightening statistics. So when we were looking at this, an estimated 6.5 million Americans age 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's as of 2022, and 73% are age 75 or older. And what's really frightening, and American Alzheimer's Association said this years ago. They said as a baby boomer generation reaches that, over the next couple decades, reach that kind of that age, and they're coming to it now. They said that Alzheimer's rates were expected to skyrocket, their exact words. And now what we know, by 2050, the number of people age 65 and older with Alzheimer's may grow to a projected 12.7 million. So from 6.5 million 65 and older currently to 2050, that number going up to 12.7 million. So doubling.
Almost going to double.
Yeah. Doubling in, what's that?
28 years.
28 years.
Yeah.
So this is not a exclusively genetic problem that our genes are getting worse and worse and worse. I don't think that's a factor. It has everything to do what's been going on in our worlds and in our environments and our lifestyle. So this is a very important topic.
Yeah, I agree. And especially because it doesn't just affect the individual, right? It also affects caregivers. It affects children. It affects grandchildren. It can be pretty impactful for families when they have family members that have cognitive decline, or they have dementia, or they have Alzheimer's. So something that's really important, something that we really kind of took to heart when we were looking at topics. It's not necessarily an easy or fun one to discuss like some of the other ones that we have are, but it's something that's really important because the more aware you are, and the earlier you start your intervention, like the potential interventions, the better off you're going to be. So, what are some signs of cognitive decline? Basically, they can start really subtly, and then they manifest themselves more significantly later in life. This can be slower mental processing or increased mental fatigability. So things that you would have normally been able to do really easily all of a sudden become more taxing, or you're tired afterwards. This could be something as simple as like reading a book or dealing with personal interactions.
So you're kind of talking about like mental stamina, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. where
And then
a task was, relatively easy, and then you start doing and you get fatigue, or you fall asleep reading a book earlier, or you can't drive as long, things like that, right? Is that kind of what
absolutely.
Because I know you're playing in the neuro world all the time, so you probably see a lot of stuff.
You do. Yeah. Yep. You can. And I think the more aware of it you are, the more you see it. I guess. When you look at things like what is the mental acuity, like how accurate are their thoughts? Are they accurate with word recall? Are they accurate with,
Details.
Are they stumbling over their words? Are they looking for words all the time?
Yeah.
Is their interaction in conversations appropriate? All that kind of stuff can be another sign.
So you're talking about social appropriateness.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it and you go, okay, they just made kind of an off-colored comment. Is that something that maybe they wouldn't have said 15 years ago if you knew them, or if they're acting erratically or anything like that? That can be really kind of an early indicator as well.
Yeah. And I know we always talk about tests, but there's really, other than you go for a proper, but is there even a proper examination to test?
Well,
I guess
there is. It's really comes down to a examination by a qualified provider, right? Because there's no imaging that they can do. There's no, standardized imaging. There's no standardized test like lab test that would show you definitively, oh yeah, like you have early onset this. They can just say, we suspect that it is probably this. And unfortunately, most of the time that's only ruled in or out definitively after that patient person has passed away.
And I know there was, tests years ago when the big genetic movement happened, where you could try to determine, your precursors or genetic risk factors. I don't know who would even want to know that if there's no solution to it. Why would you want to tarnish your happiness in life, or your satisfaction in life, if you truly believe you're going to end up with, serious high level dementia, right?
I guess the only thing I could think is that wanting to know so that you could make sure that everything was in order, making sure that your friends or your family and your loved ones and everything were taken care of, your estate was in order.
Yeah.
I think that I would probably want to know if I was if it was, possible, so I could make sure that everything was taken care of, so I could, put the appropriate steps in place for my family. So
yeah, and that was when, the genetic model just first came out, and it was like all or none. It was a true belief system that there was nothing else that could be done. And we've talked about this before, and I can't remember what doctor said that, genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So just because there's a genetic predisposition does not mean that this is you. And I think
it might not ever be expressed, right?
I think it was 93, or right around 93% was lifestyle, 7% was genetic. Effects. So that kind of takes us to risk factors. There's a lot of risk factors with cognitive decline, dementia,
Alzheimer's,
like anemia. Anemia means, reduced oxygen, many different reasons. We've done a topic on anemia.
Yeah, we've done that before. There's B12, there's iron, there's a bunch of those. If you have questions on those, look back in the anemia podcast. There's a ton of good information on that.
That's right. So anemia just means low oxygenation in the blood, and the brain needs oxygen. So there's low oxygen over a period of time, and there's many causes of low oxygen. Anemia is just one of them. History, we kind of touched on that. There's a genetic potential. Let's just call it potential, because we know genetics don't run the show. Cardiovascular complications. You want to touch on that a little bit? I know it's kind of your world.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at cardiovascular complications, that was kind of like a broad stroke subset when we were talking about it. Cause it really, when you look at, there's going to be different components that, lead to cardiovascular compromise, whether that is, an enlarged heart, congestive heart failure. It could be that you have elevated blood pressure, hypertension. It could be that you have, sclerosis in your arteries and they're hardening, so they no longer have that elastic recoil. And basically what it comes down to is it's all about delivering, the blood that supplies the nutrients and the oxygen. If it's harder to get blood to your brain, and your brain is no longer basically manufacturing the appropriate levels of energy, it's going to be harder for your brain to function at a high level.
Yeah.
So really it comes down to fuel delivery, right? If you can't get it up there,
you need a good fuel pump.
Yeah. If you can't pump it and you can't get it there, then you're not setting yourself up for success, right?
Yeah. The engine's going to sputter. Also, like lipid issues, there's a concern, and even medications associated with high
Small
cholesterol.
vessel disease. I mean, all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff is really, when you think about how big the artery is to start and how small it ends when it goes from, arteries to capillaries to, arterioles, they just get progressively smaller. So you start to narrow the lumen, or the inside of that, that vessel, and it really can change the amount of perfusion or the amount of blood that can get to that area just based on,
That's true. When you're talking about the size and the anatomy, oh my goodness, this is gets to the point of microscopic. It's so small. It's so fragile, and it's everything. Blood flow is everything. It's absolutely
everything.
Yeah, and to have that, that's why there's so many cardiovascular problems, because that is a very fragile, weak link. And then we fill our blood up with a bunch of poisons and toxins and inflammatory everything. Well, how is it that we aren't going to start destroying our conduit, our pipe work that is the bloodline, the lifeline, the bloodline of everything? Yeah. It's not a great big hose that's just kind of feeding the plant.
Yeah, really.
It's more complicated than that.
Much more complicated.
Delicate. And then I know we beat this up before when we did our diabetes podcast, or 3 or 2 episodes, but like blood sugar problems, diabetes, prediabetes, your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's goes up. I don't know what it was. It was almost double. If you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. So
when you look at it, and I've heard this from a couple different providers that I've taken the courses with, it's like they're literally calling like Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, right? That there's that strong of a correlation between unregulated blood sugars and the development of Alzheimer's later on in life. Yeah. So if you want to substantially increase your risk of developing cognitive decline, whether that's Alzheimer's or, frontal lobe dementia, whatever it is, then have unregulated blood sugar.
It's so true. And I remember this is years ago, and we talked about it in the podcast on diabetes. But I think the last stat, it was expected that 50% of the American population was either diabetic or pre-diabetic. I believe that is the biggest elephant in the room when we're talking about cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever stage it is. I believe that blood sugar dysregulation, high or low, or diabetes, pre-diabetes, I believe that's the biggest contributor. I really do.
I think I'd probably agree with you there. And it makes it so much harder to help anybody if it's not addressed.
Yeah. It's just everything falls apart. So now management strategy. So cardiovascular health. Well, some obvious ones. So some of these are obvious, but it gets you to fly through some of them.
Yeah. So, cardiovascular health, we just really kind of hammered out why that's so important, right? That's the fuel delivery system. Your brain is very metabolically active. It controls everything, right? So it's going to need a lot of energy. It's going to need a lot of oxygen. You make more energy in the presence of oxygen than you do without it. It's like 34 energy molecules to 2,
right,
in the presence of oxygen versus without it. So if you want to be efficient, have a lot of oxygen. You want a lot of oxygen? Well, you got to be able to deliver it, right? That means that keeping your heart healthy. That means maintaining your lipids. That means, all the cardiovascular health. We've done podcasts on this as well. If you have questions on, what type of exercise you might want to start dabbling into, we have a podcast.
Yeah, we've talked
for that as well. I think that it kind of looks cyclical. It's like we go over all this stuff, but all this stuff is really good information. This is stuff that we tell people each and every day. So it really is applicable, and it works. So we look at that stuff, exercise, managing the lipids, manage blood sugar, looking at medications, because medications can have detrimental impacts. There's been some medications where, there's been a high level of correlation with the development of cognitive decline later on with prolonged use of it.
Yeah, a common symptom of not all, but cholesterol lowering medications. Someone goes on cholesterol lowering medications, any kind of statins, and then they start having memory concern. Don't ignore it. Don't feel like you can't tell your doctor. Run to your doctor, tell them immediately, because it's a common side effect. And hopefully that they can modify everything and quit that damage. Also blood pressure medication, see it all the time. Same thing, the heart's got to pump up. You reduce the blood pressure too much. If the
it's going to be hard to pump it against gravity, right?
Yeah.
You don't have enough pressure.
Yeah. So again, do blood pressure tests at home. I usually say do it twice, earlier in the day, later in the day. in the same patterns you do everything else, and collect a database of it so you can bring it to your doctor, because a one blood pressure test in the clinic is not enough. It's not going to be accurate. And you can bring that there. If your blood pressure is getting too low, that could be a major cause of all sorts of cognitive impairment and brain dysfunction, and you don't want your plant starving for too long, because it's only going to get injured. And can brain cells grow back, Dr. Kolby?
No.
Yeah,
they cannot. They can. The ones that are there can get stronger and more efficient, but once they're gone.
Yeah, so we're poisoning ourselves. We kill enough brain cells, and age does that as well. So we don't need to prematurely. Which brings us to diet, which we talked about, diabetes and alcohol. Alcohol is a big player with, well, there is alcohol induced dementia, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There's probably a fancy name for it. I don't even know.
Yeah, it damages your frontal lobe, right? You can literally look at it and it atrophies. Your brain shrinks.
That's right. You take a picture of your brain and you will see
when we look at it, alcohol is basically metabolized in your cerebellum first, and your cerebellum is what's responsible for coordination and all this kind of stuff. This is why when you have like a sobriety test on the side of the road, they're like, can you stand on one leg? Can you touch the tip of your nose? Whatever. But the cerebellum also is really important because it projects to a lot of other areas of your brain, right? So if that thing is not working,
it's like a circuit board.
And it's not stimulating or talking to the other parts of your brain, then they're not getting activated either. So it's more than just the frontal lobe, it's the other parts of the brain as well. But alcohol can be a big player for sure.
That's right. And then, I know we talked about how to mitigate other risks, like environmental risks, of course, chemicals and pesticides and all of that, pathogens, heavy metals,
neurotoxins.
Yeah. There's a lot out there, and, I don't recommend falling into that. Hey, everybody needs heavy metal tests. I think that's, you're amongst a bunch of alcohol and blood sugar problems and blood pressure problems, and
maybe heavy metals is not the place I would start.
Yeah, that's kind of splitting here. That's probably not the first place to run, but it is a factor. I guess it is a factor depending on the history, and then stimulation is another. It's a big player, right? Well, every day,
yeah, for sure.
Or almost every day in your practice.
I like to use the analogy. It's like a muscle, right? If you're a bodybuilder and then you don't use your biceps for 20 years, your biceps are definitely going to shrink, right? If you don't use your brain, if you go from someone who's a high performing, professional or whatever, and you're really stimulated every day, and then all of a sudden you don't do anything, and that's not saying like, oh, I just quit doing my job, right? You just quit doing everything, you quit exercising, you quit having meaningful relationships with your friends and family, you quit reading, you quit flexing the old brain, then it will shrink. And, that can be a, predisposing factor.
That's right.
Stay active, continue to be engaged, because you want to use it. Otherwise you lose it.
Yeah. Just like walking, running, or absolutely anything else in our lives. Right. So, when we started talking, and I talked about when people are younger and they're not in this risk category, they like to put it out of sight, out of mind. And that is when the damage starts. It's when we're younger. It doesn't just happen at 60 or 70. It doesn't just happen then. It's a slow damage and inflammatory, irritation and destruction of neuronal tissue, neuronal cell death at a younger age. It doesn't happen later on in life. So if you want to keep your brain together, really, really consider the things that we said and let it just be your life. Because, can you 100% prevent it? No, but there's a significant reason why the rates of cognitive decline, premature cognitive decline in Alzheimer's and dementia is literally skyrocketing, according to the American Alzheimer's Association.
Diabetes, and it's not just because we all got a bunch of concussions, right? There's a bunch of other lifestyle.
That's right. Yeah. And it's not only diabetes. I've seen early stage dementia in late 30s, and it would have never been caught, because no one's looking for dementia.
Right. Not in your 30s.
Yeah. But when someone has brain, so this is another thing, and I'm a bit of a tangent here, but brain fog, so many people are suffering from brain fog and inability to focus, that those are the warning lights going off. And if that brain fog continues on for years, you're destroying your brain even earlier than what, as bad as as society is right now. So never accept it. And I've had a lot of brain fog clients. I never thought I'd see that much in clinic. Honestly, when I started practice, I never thought I'd see that much brain fog and inability to focus and all of that. And now it's more common than ever. But everybody I work with is able to pull out of it. Absolutely everybody. But I tell you, and I know you've seen this, Dr. Kolby, if someone is 30 versus 60, there's a massive response at 30. You can move them a lot quicker. It's 60, faster. 70. Everything is slower if you're going to do it. But don't ignore the warning lights of brain fog. And I know we're not talking about brain fog, but this is kind of late stage brain fog.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
you're not wrong.
Anyway, that's all I have.
Yeah, I think that's it. We kind of beat it to death. Obviously, if you guys have questions, you can get a hold of us. Our email associated with the podcast is info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can drop us a comment down below. Again, hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications, because we're going to keep rolling this stuff out each week. If you have questions for us individually, you can get on our websites and find our contact information. My website is northlakeschiropractic.com. Dr. Glenn's is drgharrison.com. And again, stay tuned because we're going to keep rolling out this content each and every week.
All right. That sounds good, Dr. Kolby. I look forward to the next one.
All right, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Stay sharp. Bye-bye.
Bye.